everyone, welcome back to Not a Movie Buff. Y'all, we have made it to episode 5, and today we're talking about something that has been bothering movie fans for years, especially fans who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s like me. We're talking about reboots, Hollywood's favorite solution to everything. Running out of ideas? Reboot something. Trying to revive a franchise? Reboot something. Haven't had a hit in a while? Reboot anything that ever had a VHS release. It's kind of crazy how predictable it's become. Studios treat nostalgia like it's some kind of cure-all. Like if they just remake something we used to love, we'll automatically show up, open our wallets, and pretend we don't notice the heart is missing. And the part that really gets me is they think nostalgia alone is enough to replace effort. Like we're going to see a familiar brand name and immediately forget what made that thing special in the first place. But the older I get, the more I realize nostalgia is not about the remake, it's about the memory. It's about who we were when we watched the original, the friends we watched it with, the family we watched it with, the life we were living at the time. All of that is tied into the experience. You can't just slap the same title on a new movie and expect that emotion to magically show up again. And that's the fundamental problem with nostalgia-driven filmmaking. Studios chase the logo, not the legacy. They remember the brand, not the feeling. They think we're attached to the product, but really, we're attached to the presence. We're attached to what that movie meant to us before life got complicated. When studios reboot something, they always assume the original was beloved because it existed, not because of what it represented. So instead of honoring the soul of the story, they start updating things that never needed updating. They remove the heart, they remove the charm, they remove the emotion, and they call it modern. It's like watching someone upgrade your childhood home by painting over every wall, throwing out all the furniture, and then acting shocked when you say the place doesn't feel like home anymore. What studios fail to understand is that nostalgia isn't about perfection, it's about personality. Some of the movies we grew up loving were messy, they were weird, chaotic, but they had identity, they had soul, they had a point of view. And you can't reboot personality with a high resolution camera and an edgier script. You have to understand what made that personality resonate in the first place. But what usually happens? Studios go all in on surface level updates. More realism, more CGI, more gloomy lighting, more dramatic tone, more adult themes. They start thinking modern means serious, even when the original wasn't serious at all. They chase complexity even when the magic of the original was simplicity. They focus on presentation instead of meaning. And you can always tell when it's done out of fear of taking risks, trying something new, trusting fresh ideas. So instead of innovation, we get repetition, but shinier, upgraded visuals with downgraded emotion. And the craziest part is, we notice immediately. You can feel when a movie is missing its heartbeat. You can feel when the nostalgia is manufactured instead of earned. It's that moment in the theater when you're watching the reboot and all you think is, this isn't bad, but something's off. And 9 times out of 10, that something is soul. Because the soul of the story, it can't be manufactured. It has to be understood. It has to be respected. It has to be carried forward with intention. A reboot doesn't have to be the same. It just has to be honest. It has to know what it's trying to preserve. It has to know what the original meant to people. And it has to know that nostalgia is a feeling, not a feature to toggle on and off. But when a reboot misses the mark, when it removes everything that mattered and replaces it with glossy nothingness, that's when the disappointment hits. Not because you wanted a perfect remake, but because you wanted a meaningful one. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. Not just to drag bad reboots, but to actually talk about what happens when studios misunderstand the assignment, when they mistake recognition for connection, when they chase the past without caring. So today, we're breaking down some reboots. They had some real potential, but somewhere along the way, the meaning got lost. Not because they didn't have the budget, not because they didn't have the tech, not because they didn't have the talent, but because they didn't have the heart. So let's talk about it. If we're talking about reboots that completely miss the meaning, it only makes sense to start with a movie that had every reason to succeed and still managed to fumble the entire assignment. I'm talking about the 2020 version of Mulan. And before I get into why the reboot didn't work, let me make something extremely clear. I absolutely love the original Mulan. Like I genuinely love it. The music, it's top 5 classic Disney soundtracks for me, easily. The songs still hit the same all the years. Reflection, I'll make a man out of you, honor to us all, a girl worth fighting for. Every one of them is memorable, emotional, perfectly placed. The story, entertaining from beginning to end. There's no drag, no slow patch, no moment where you're checking the time. Everything flows and feels intentional. And Mushu, come on, Eddie Murphy was hilarious. He wasn't just comic relief, he had personality. He brought charm, energy, and heart to every scene he was in. He represented fear, doubt, support, humor, and the whole messy journey of trying to do something big when you don't feel ready. So, yeah, I didn't come into this reboot wanting it to fail. I wasn't rooting against it. I wasn't even demanding perfection. All I wanted, and all anybody who loved the original wanted, was a version that respected the heart of the story. But that's not what we got. We got the biggest mistake, because the biggest mistake that the 2020 version of Mulan made was turning Mulan into someone she never was. In the animated version, Mulan's just a regular girl trying to protect her father. She's not a warrior. She's not trained. She's not powerful. She grows into her strength. She learns. She fails. She gets knocked down, but she gets back up again. That growth is why we root for her. It's why the story is inspiring. It's why kids connect to her, why adults connected to her, why the story still means something today. But in the reboot, Disney decided Mulan needed to start powerful. She needed to have chi that basically amounted to superhuman ability. She was chosen, gifted, destined. All the words that completely erase the point of her journey. Because when you make a character born extraordinary, you take away the struggle. And when you take away the struggle, you take away the heart. There's no fear, no doubt, no vulnerability. And without vulnerability, there's no emotional connection. The original Mulan didn't succeed because she was special. She succeeded because she was determined. She succeeded because she tried and because she kept going even when she had nothing left in the tank. And that's what the reboot replaced with glossy visuals and fancy choreography. And speaking of replacing things, let's talk about the decision to remove the songs, the humor, Mushu. Like, you can't take out everything that made the original emotionally rich and then expect people to feel the same connection. You just can't do that. The songs weren't just songs, they were emotional beats. They moved the story and shaped the pacing. They helped you understand Mulan's inner world. Without them, the reboot feels like it's missing entire chapters of feeling. Mushu, they swapped one of the most charismatic Disney side characters ever for a silent CGI phoenix that flies around doing absolutely nothing except symbolism. Symbolism doesn't talk. It doesn't support you through fear. It doesn't make you laugh when you're stressed out, and it doesn't help you feel the heart of a story. So what you're left with is a version of Mulan that looks serious but doesn't feel serious. A story that wants weight but doesn't earn weight. A movie that keeps asking you to care without giving you a reason to. Even the tone is confused. Disney hyped this up as a realistic take, but then threw in wire few flips, rooftop battles, and magical superhero moments like he couldn't decide what genre it wanted to be. If you want realism, commit to realism. If you want fantasy, commit to fantasy. But doing half of each gives you something that looks dramatic but feels empty. And that emptiness, that's the real issue. Because when you strip away the music, the humor, the emotion, and the vulnerability, what are you left with? Pretty visuals, nice locations, but no heartbeat. 2020 Mulan isn't a terrible movie, but it's a hollow one. A reboot that forgot the heart of the story and tried to replace it with spectacle. And if Mulan is an example of a reboot losing its emotional core, the next movie is an example of a reboot losing its identity. Because next, we need to talk about The Amazing Spider-Man, a reboot with potential that got tangled in all the wrong ways. Mulan's biggest issue was losing the emotional core of its story. The Amazing Spider-Man, on the other hand, is one of those reboots where you can see something good trying to break through, but the movie never gives it enough structure to actually shine. It's frustrating because the potential is there. It's clear as day. but the film keeps drifting in directions that don't serve the character, tone, or story. So let me get this out of the way. Andrew Garfield, phenomenal Spider Man. He brought a level of physicality, attitude, and looseness that made the character feel alive. The way he moved in the suit, the lanky agility, expressive body language, the confidence. It felt like someone who finally found a space where he could be himself. His quips didn't feel like they were thrown in because the script needed a joke. They felt natural, like a coping mechanism, like nerves turning into humor. He understood that side of Spider Man perfectly. But the second the mask came off, that's where the writing started working against him. This movie had tried to reinvent Peter Parker in ways that didn't fit the character at all. Peter, he's not supposed to be some brooding skater kid with a perfectly messy haircut who looks like he stepped out of an indie romance. He's not supposed to feel like some kind of cool, misunderstood guy with a rebellious streak. He's supposed to be awkward, a little clumsy, focused on school, not someone who looks like he's one deep stare away from joining a garage band. It's got nothing to do with Andrew's performance. It's all about the writing. The film never commits to one version of Peter. Some scenes lean into him being shy and nerdy, but other scenes make him edgy and aloof, and the rest try to give him a confidence he shouldn't have until after he becomes Spider-Man. It's like the movie keeps picking from a list of modern teen protagonist traits without realizing that Peter Parker already had an identity that people loved. But there is one part of the movie that did work emotionally. Gwen Stacy. Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone had genuine chemistry. Not that forced wooden kind where the script is doing all the heavy lifting, but the kind where you feel the connection through their timing, their looks, their conversations. Their scenes feel grounded and honest. There's a softness between them that the rest of the movie doesn't have. It almost feels like their movie lives in a different universe from the superhero plot. When they're talking, I believe them. When they're figuring each other out, it feels natural. Their dynamic, it gives the film a human anchor that the rest of the story struggles to build on. But the movie doesn't give that emotional core the support it needs because it keeps forcing in the mystery parents storyline. This is one of those decisions that drags the whole film down. Spider-Man doesn't need a conspiracy arc. He doesn't need secret research files. He doesn't need a sci-fi childhood origin that turns him into some chosen science experiment with destiny attached to his name. Peter Parker's life-changing moment is supposed to be simple and tragic. A dumb decision, a selfish moment, a reminder that choices matter. But the reboot doesn't slow down enough to let that weight sink in. Uncle Ben's death doesn't just hit with the force it needs, not because the performance is bad, but because the film is too distracted by everything else. The Lizard is another missed opportunity. He should have been a tragic character, someone with depth and conflict, but this version barely gives him room to breathe. There's not enough build-up, not enough emotional connection, not enough personality. He ends up feeling like an obligatory villain instead of someone who challenges Peter in any meaningful way. But even with all those issues, I can't say that this movie's a failure because the Spider-Man moments are genuinely good. The action scenes are dynamic, the web-swinging point of view shots still look great, and the fights still feel fluid and expressive. You can tell Andrew put real thought into how Spider-Man should move. Lighter, faster, more flexible. And there are scenes in this movie where you can see the version of Spider-Man fans wish they had gotten in a better story. It's like the character's ready to go, but the movie's not ready for him. And that's why this reboot is frustrating rather than awful. It has pieces that work, that really work, but the identity of the film, it keeps shifting. One moment, it wants to be grounded and emotional. The next, it wants to be a conspiracy thriller. Then a darker superhero film. Then a teen romance. Then a big budget action movie. And all of those tones, they can work individually, but when you try to juggle them without a clear plan, everything starts to feel scattered. When you look at the movie today, it almost feels like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is living in a story that doesn't know how to support him. He's ready to be something iconic, but the movie surrounding him can't decide what story it wants to tell. And that's why the reboot sticks out. Not because it's bad, but because it's incomplete. There's a great Spider-Man performance lost inside a script that didn't know how to build a world around him. And that brings me to the next reboot. One that doesn't struggle with identity the same way Amazing Spider-Man does. Because Total Recall's issue is something else entirely. This next movie has polish, budget, style, and ambition, but somehow none of it adds up to a personality. Let's get into 2012's Total Recall. The Amazing Spider-Man showed what happens when a reboot has good pieces but can't pull itself together. But 2012's Total Recall? This is a reboot with all the surface level upgrades, all the expensive polish and futuristic shine, but somehow absolutely none of the personality that made the original memorable. And the thing is, this one didn't frustrate me the way Spider Man did. Spider Man felt like a balancing act that kept wobbling. Total Recall feels more like a movie that checked every technical box but forgot to leave room for anything human. Which is crazy because, on paper, this reboot should have been a slam dunk. A strong cast, a well known sci fi property, a bigger budget, and modern filmmaking tools that could finally show the type of world the 1990 version could only suggest. Everything was there. But the movie gets so distracted by trying to look cool that it forgets to be anything. Let's start with the tone, because that's where the disconnect hits the fastest. The original Total Recall was messy, gloriously messy. It had practical effects that were weird and creative. It had that gritty, sweaty, industrial sci fi vibe. It had humor, violence, camp, and personality all mixed together. You might forget certain plot details, but you never forget how it felt fun, chaotic, and energetic. The reboot? It looks like a tech demo. Everything is sleek, shiny, grayscale, or metallic. It's just emotionally flat. You can tell millions of dollars were spent on the visuals, but none of that money went toward giving the world a sense of life. It's a movie that looks designed, not lived in. The world building is the perfect example. The film creates all this futuristic infrastructure, high tech transportation, holograms, robotic police, and yet none of it feels connected to the characters using it. It's all background. Cool background, sure, but background nonetheless. Sci fi only works when the world reflects the people inside it. This world feels like a showroom floor. Colin Farrell, he does what he can. He's not the problem. He brings emotion when he's allowed to, but the script barely gives him room for personality. He's acting inside a movie that refuses to slow down long enough to let you care about him. He's surrounded by characters who feel more like props, and the story never lets relationships breathe. Even the action, it's well staged, well shot, it's clean, but it feels strangely empty. It's not bad, but it's not rooted in anything. You can admire the choreography and still forget the scene 10 minutes later. And that's the part that hurts the most. The action isn't memorable because the stakes never feel personal. Everything just kind of happens. One of the biggest problems is that the film tries to be serious without having the emotional depth to back it up. It strips away the camp of the original, but it doesn't replace it with anything equally engaging. When a movie takes itself seriously, the drama has to hit. But here, the drama feels like background noise to the visual effects. And that's what separates this reboot from the others in this episode. Mulan misunderstood its own message. Amazing Spider-Man struggled with its identity. Total Recall doesn't misunderstand anything. It just never develops a personality. It's like the filmmakers focused on updating everything except the actual point. The characters don't feel alive. The relationships don't matter. The world doesn't breathe. You're watching the movie happen instead of feeling like you're inside of it. There are moments that hint at something interesting, a spark here, a concept there, but the film never lets those moments shape the story. It's paced like it's scared you'll get bored if it slows down for 5 seconds. But without those moments of stillness or humanity, the action doesn't mean anything. This reboot is the definition of technically fine but emotionally empty. Terrible, offensive, hollow. Total Reboot is the kind of reboot you watch, shrug at, and forget about the second the credits hit. It doesn't leave you angry. It doesn't leave you impressed. It doesn't even leave you curious. It's just there. And honestly, that kind of emptiness is one thing when you're dealing with a sci fi remake that never had deep emotional roots to begin with. But when a reboot takes that same hollow approach and applies it to characters who should have been full of life, personality, and actual heart, that's when the disappointment hits in a completely different way. And that's exactly why the next movie on my list stands out. Not because it's bland, but because it took the Fantastic Four, one of the most iconic, optimistic teams in comics, and turned them into the most lifeless, joyless version of themselves I've ever seen on screen. Total Recall is the kind of reboot you can forget about right after watching it, but 2015's Fantastic Four leaves a completely different kind of impression. The kind where you walk out of the theater wondering how a movie with this cast, budget, and this much potential ended up feeling so painfully dull. To this day, it is still my least favorite superhero movie of all time. And the moment I first saw it, I knew something was off. Not in a quirky way or an experimental way, but in a way that just makes the whole film feel empty, heavy, uncomfortable from jump. Fantastic Four has always been an optimistic team. They're hopeful, adventurous. They're a family built on discovery, curiosity, and being there for each other even when everything goes sideways. They're supposed to bring energy into the Marvel Universe, literally the opposite of gloom. So the decision to turn this reboot into a bleak, color drained, emotionally cold science project never made sense to me. Everything about the tone feels misplaced. The lighting, the pacing, dialogue, even the music. There's no warmth, no humor, no personality. It feels like somebody took the Fantastic Four name and slapped it on a completely different type of movie. The worst part is that the cast isn't even the problem. Michael B. Jordan, Kate Mara, Miles Teller, these are actors who can carry entire films by themselves. But in this script, they're all boxed into characters who barely talk to each other. They barely show emotion, and they barely resemble the heroes they are supposed to become. Their chemistry feels non existent because the story keeps them isolated and serious for so long that by the time they're supposed to work as a team, it doesn't feel like a team at all. It feels like four people who got stapled into the same plot at the last minute. And then we get to the thing. And this is where my dislike for the movie hits a whole different level. His design isn't cool or powerful, it's unsettling. And not in a tragic way or a I feel sorry for him type of way. It's just unsettling. He looks like someone crushed a pile of construction debris into a vaguely human shape with no warmth or expression behind the eyes. It's uncomfortable to look at and it never draws you in emotionally. But the part that really bothered me with the thing was the decision to keep his voice completely normal. Ben Grimm's transformation is supposed to hit you in the gut, physically and emotionally. His voice should have weight, presence, something that reflects what the character is going through. Instead, it just sounds like Jamie Bell and some kind of filter. It completely breaks the illusion. The pacing of the movie was completely terrible. It was painfully slow in the beginning, and then suddenly we rush into the last 30 minutes like the movie was sprinting for the finish line. You get some kind of long, drawn out setup where nothing interesting happens, then a sudden time jump that skips over the emotional consequences of their transformations. By the time the third act hits, it feels like the movie remembered it needed a villain and glued on a final battle without building anything toward it. Victor Von Doom, one of Marvel's best villains, gets one of the laziest adaptations I've ever seen. His motivations don't matter, his personality never forms, his design looks horrible, and his final confrontation with the team is over in minutes with no tension and no emotional impact. It's a reboot with no direction and no understanding of why the Fantastic Four work in the first place. Honestly, I'm glad there was never a sequel. And it may sound harsh, but this version needed to end exactly where it did so the franchise could be rebuilt from scratch by people who actually understand the tone and heart behind these characters. And thankfully, we have the MCU version. It's already so much more in line with what the Fantastic Four should be: brighter, more adventurous, more family centered, more alive. It actually feels like the first time we'll get a version of this team that makes sense on the big screen. Out of every movie in this episode, 2015's Fantastic Four is the one that I'm happiest to leave behind. Not because I enjoy hating it, but because the new reboot makes it so much easier to move on and look forward to something better. 2015's Fantastic Four was easy to criticize because it never understood its characters in the first place. But 2019's The Lion King hits differently, and not in a good way. This one still bothers me because the original is my favorite movie of all time. I don't mean a comfort movie, a childhood classic. It's my actual number one. But the remake managed to take something that meant so much to me and turn it into the flattest, most emotional version of itself. And to make it even more personal, this ended up being the very first movie review I ever wrote. Not because I walked out inspired, but because I had so much frustration built up that I needed somewhere to put it. That review's the reason I started breaking down movies the way I do now. Going into the remake, I wasn't rooting against it. The cast was strong, the visuals looked incredible, and the idea of using modern technology to retell a timeless story seemed promising. I was open minded, I wanted it to work. But the moment the movie started, I realized realism was about to kill everything that made the original special. The Lion King never needed hyper realistic animals, it needed emotion. And the remake sacrifices the emotional core of the entire story just to show off how real everything looks. Yes, it's visually stunning, probably one of the best looking Disney films ever made. But visuals don't mean anything when the characters can't show a single real expression. Real lions can't smile, they can't cry, they can't react with their eyes, they can't physically convey the emotion the story depends on. And because of that, almost every major moment falls flat. The thing that bothered me most, the moment that said everything, was Mufasa's death. In the original, it's one of the most powerful scenes ever animated. It's the only movie scene that's ever made me cry. You can feel Simba's terror, his denial, his heartbreak. All of his emotions carry that scene. But in the reboot, Simba's face looks the same before, during, and after Mufasa dies. There's no visual devastation, no fear, disbelief, or breakdown. The emotional weight disappears because the character literally can't show that emotion. The same problem hits Scar, Nala, Rafiki, even Timon and Pumbaa. Almost everybody sounds like they're trying. The cast isn't the issue, but the expressions don't match the performances. It's emotionally disconnected from start to finish. And the pacing? Slower, flatter, heavier in a bad way. Even the music doesn't hit, not because the songs are worse, but because the scenes around them feel empty. Great music can't save a movie that refuses to let its characters feel anything. People love to say, well, it's not terrible, it's just different, and I completely disagree. Looking good doesn't make something good. A movie needs emotion, heart, pacing, personality, and this remake barely has any of that. When I first reviewed it, I gave it a 4 out of 10, and honestly, that was generous. But the more I sit with it, the more I realize how much this version stripped away what made the original a masterpiece. Is it the worst movie ever made? No. But it's not a good movie, and it's definitely not a worthy successor to the original. It's a visually stunning shell with nothing beating inside. And while the Mufasa prequel might be a slight improvement, it doesn't change how hollow this reboot feels. I'll never rewatch it, I have no desire to revisit it. And for a remake of my favorite movie of all time, that alone says everything. Looking back at all these movies side by side, it becomes pretty obvious that reboots don't fail because the audience didn't give them a chance. They fail because they lose the one thing that made the original work. And what's interesting is that each movie in this lineup misses the mark in a different way, but for all the same underlying reason. The people making them focused on the wrong priorities. Mulan stripped out the humor, the warmth, and the emotional connection that made the original resonate and tried to replace it with a more serious tone the story wasn't built to carry. The Amazing Spider-Man had an incredible Spider-Man performance, genuine chemistry with Gwen, and flashes of greatness, but the movie surrounding those strengths couldn't decide what kind of story it wanted to tell, and that confusion kept the whole thing from landing. Total Recall upgraded the visuals and the technology, but lost the personality and world building that made the first movie fun and memorable. It had style, but no heartbeat. 2015's Fantastic Four is the perfect example of a reboot that fails before it even starts. It doesn't just misunderstand the tone, it strips away everything the team stands for. The optimism, the family dynamic, the adventurous spirit, none of that made it into the movie. It tries so hard to be serious and grounded that it forgets these characters were never meant to live in that kind of story. It's a reboot with no identity, energy, or emotional foundation. And then there's 2019's The Lion King, the one that hits closest to home for me. It remembers every detail of the original's visuals, but ignores the emotion behind those moments. It tries to recreate the shape of a masterpiece without giving it a pulse, and the result is a movie that looks incredible, but feels empty. Different movies, studios, reasons for failing, but all of them point back to the same core truth. A reboot can change anything except the heart. The heart has to stay. If it doesn't, the audience feels it instantly. The best reboots don't succeed because they copy the original, they succeed because they understand why the original mattered. They honor the foundation and build something new on top of it. The movies in this episode, they're examples of what happens when studios reverse that formula. They start with the visuals, tone, update, technology, only then to try to figure out the story. But by that point, it's too late. The soul of the film is already gone. Reboots aren't impossible to get right, but the ones we've talked about today show how easy they are to get wrong when you rebuild everything except the part that actually mattered. And that's going to do it for today's episode. This one was a ride because talking about these reboots really shows how much movies have changed over the years, not just in how they look, but in how studios think audiences connect with stories. And honestly, breaking all this down with you makes me appreciate the originals even more. They didn't always have the biggest budgets or the flashiest visuals, but they had heart, and heart is the one thing you can't cut corners on. You feel it when it's there, and you feel it definitely when it's missing. If you've made it this far into the episode, I appreciate you for real. This podcast has been growing every week, and the fact that you're here listening, whether it's on your drive, at work, or while you're cooking, however you listen, it means a lot. You don't have to agree with every opinion I have, but you're here for the conversation, and that's what makes this fun. Now, next week, we've got something special on deck. Since it's Thanksgiving week, we're switching things up with the full Thanksgiving special. We're talking about the movies people randomly end up watching every year around this time, not because they're Thanksgiving movies, but because they've become part of the holiday tradition anyway. The comfort watches. The "this is just what we put on while the food is cooking" movies. The stuff your family quotes without even realizing it. It's going to be a good vibe, chill, nostalgic, and perfect for the week. And right after that, don't forget we've got this Zootopia 2 review dropping the very next Tuesday. You better believe I'll be in the theater opening night, and you better believe I'll be giving my raw and honest thoughts. So if you're excited for that one, make sure you're following the podcast so the episode hits your feed as soon as it drops. No hunting for it or guessing, it'll just be there waiting for you. And since Zootopia 2 does come out this week, I may not be a movie buff, but if you're going to see Zootopia 2 on opening night, I'll see you at the movies.